What do you say?
I recommend it.
Now we're recording. The internet is full of information on tactics about email marketing and even some useful strategy information. But there's very little information about what it is going to feel like and what kind of thoughts are going to go through your head when you actually start using email marketing in a effective, I dare say, forceful manner to try to sell your services. And that's really what I wanted to speak to, because I think that there's at least a sort of subconscious awareness that you're going to run into this stuff. And I think it prevents a lot of people from even getting started. So that's why I chose the topic. The panelists, I'm just going to go actually, I don't know, right to left. We'll start with Ari. I invited Ari on. Let's tell you just real briefly that Ari has a sort of blended product services model. So he sells information products and expensive consulting services, like I hope a lot of you do as well. And Ari has been using email marketing for a while. He's got experience with blogging and sort of making the transition from blogging to having an email list. So I think his perspective is going to be interesting because he's starting to, in my view, more deeply embrace the idea of selling over email. Hal No is with us. Hal is a consultant, SAP consulting, right?
That's right.
So Hal is selling services, also expensive services, to big companies with, I assume, very difficult, convoluted sales processes or buying processes. And Hal's very early on in sort of embracing email marketing. So I think his perspective is going to be great because, no offense, but he's sort of a newbie and he's right in the middle of a lot of this stuff. Janelle Allen, our next panelist, Janelle also has a sort of blended information product services model. She's been using email marketing for a while, and I think is going to have that perspective both of using it herself and also advising a lot of her clients on how to use it, because a lot of her clients are building courses perhaps for the first time, and they're also needing to sort of understand how best to use email marketing. Finally, this was not mentioned in the invite. Jonathan Stark is our late-breaking addition to this panel. Hold on just a second here. I'm going to say something on, what slide is it? It doesn't really matter. It's about slide, I think it's about slide 25. I'm going to say some stuff that's going to come across as batshit crazy to most of you. Jonathan's my backup on that. He's going to be here to say, Philip's not crazy. This really does work. And that's why I wanted him here. Jonathan also has that kind of blended services, info products model in his business, multiple streams of revenue. It's a wonderful thing. He's using email marketing primarily on the sort of low price services side. And I think we'll have some interesting things to say about that. So welcome panelists, welcome folks who are here. If you have questions, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the window. Please drop them in there. Normally I keep these presentations to about 30 minutes. This one's definitely going to be longer because I want to include the perspective of the panelists. So that said, there still should be some time at the end to answer your questions. And so I hope you'll just drop them in the Q&A. If there are no questions, that's not going to bother me. I'm just going to interview the panel, and this is going to be a fascinating 90-minute, event. But hopefully, if you have questions, take advantage of the opportunity to get a real nice range of input on those questions. With that said, I'm going to launch into the presentation. I'll be sort of inviting the panelists to participate at certain points in the presentation. Okay, can somebody confirm that you're seeing what looks like a slide deck?
Yep.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I've already kind of briefly covered the agenda here. Just remember to drop in questions in the Q&A box as we go. I think that email marketing is a very unique marketing channel. It offers some advantages that I don't see showing up in a lot of other marketing channels for whatever reason. One of those advantages is a combination of scale and personalization that I think is pretty unique. So email marketing can, scale to tremendous volumes in terms of the number of people you can reach with email marketing. That scale is not mandatory. In fact, in some cases, it may not even be desirable. I hear about people who have lists of 100 people and get great benefits from email marketing. No matter what the size of your list, it's possible to develop a very personal relationship with people over email marketing. And doing that is very affordable. It's much more affordable than broadcast television or a Super Bowl commercial. I'm not saying the scale is quite the same. It's not quite comparable, but it's a very economic way to potentially reach a very large audience and to actually build that audience. And again, the personalization is tactically very easy to do with email marketing. So that's the first benefit. Email marketing over time becomes a genuine asset for your business. So when I say an asset, I mean it's something that exists and makes money, it potentially makes money for your business without a lot of additional maintenance cost. So it does take time to build up an email list. It takes effort. Sometimes it takes money. But once you've done that, you own that asset. It's easily portable to another platform. It's not something that is, there are sort of limitations on how you can use it, but they're not typically arbitrary limitations like you see coming from social media platforms. You can do things like, look at your pipeline of work, see a slow month coming up, and tap into that asset by putting an offer in front of your list and having a sale on something. Could be on your services, could be on a product, could be on both. And that's very unique. I think that starts to help move a lot of us move out of that famine cycle and move into a more proactive stance. Email marketing tends to almost automatically identify your highest profit customers or clients, which tend to be the ones who've already bought from you, which is, again, I think a sort of unique attribute that it offers. It's a combination of a broadcast and a two-way communication channel. And this results in getting to know your audience better. You can do this to a certain extent through medium, channels like blogging or social media, but those somehow tend to feel, at least for me, less personal. And they often come with platform lock-in issues. Social is really the worst about this is your audience is not portable to a different platform. You don't really own it. It's more owned by the social media platform. Whereas with email, you have almost complete portability to another platform if you need to. Email is also, I think, outstanding at building trust. And I'm going to take a drink of water before I do this. I've got to share something with you that just blew my mind yesterday when I was doing a little bit of research on this. Reader's Digest did a survey, a poll or a survey of the 100 most trusted people in America. Now, let me just stop right here. I know that Reader's Digest is not, it's not peer-reviewed scientific study. This is not the most authoritative possible source for this information, but I still find it very interesting. Of those 100 people who were ranked the most trusted people in America, 7 of the top 10 are entertainers. And by the way, this poll is also, I think, about 2 years old. So it's not the most current, but still it gives a pretty good snapshot of how trust works in ways that I think are unexpected. 7 of the top 10 most trusted are entertainers. Number 7 and number 9 are a couple, Bill and Melinda Gates. Maya Angelou is number 5. And the rest of that top 10 are movie stars, basically. I think Steven Spielberg is somewhere in there. The highest ranking elected politician ranks number 24. That's Jimmy Carter. The highest ranking scientist is number 14, some Nobel Prize winning chemist I've never heard of. The highest ranking sports personality on this list was number 21. The highest ranking news personality is number 25, Diane Sawyer. The highest ranking judge is number 43, Stephen Breyer, Supreme Court Justice. Highest ranking comedian was number 64. Highest ranking current president of the United States is number 65, Barack Obama. And the highest ranking religious personality was number 67, Billy Graham. So to me, if you think that trust is built by being trustworthy, I think you might have a slightly inaccurate understanding of how trust is actually built. Trust doesn't get built automatically, but one of the things that builds it is showing up consistently. And I think email offers a platform for building trust that it's different. It's just different than anything else I can think of. One of the reasons why it's consistent is because your audience doesn't have to do anything extra beyond what they're already doing, which is checking their email. So in a lot of ways, email marketing is like being a columnist in some publication that your audience members already read and trust, or it's like being a personality on a TV show. It's a lot more like that than someone who's an expert on something. For some reason, the inbox seems to be a place where you can build trust more easily than other places, other contexts. And, if you set up an email course, if that's your lead magnet, if that's how people get on your email list, I think you have an opportunity to begin your relationship in a way that earns trust very quickly. Later on in this presentation, normally I don't link to stuff or promote stuff in these presentations, but I'm going to send you to a course that a guy named Josh Earl did on email courses that I think is very good. I'm going to recommend that to you because it starts to talk about how you can build trust quickly using an email course. That's one of the things it talks about. Email marketing is very introvert friendly. As an introvert myself, I find it a very sort of easy on the introvert sort of nerve centers to use email marketing. This bit of lyrics from a song by Neil Young is, I think, kind of captures that sense that to market your business, to market your services or your products, you do need an audience, but dealing with them in that sort of sort of one-on-one, face-to-face way of dealing with people is very exhausting for introverts. Email marketing gives you a filtered interaction with your best fans, your most engaged audience members, and we'll talk about this later, your worst audience members too. They kind of bubble to the top as well when it comes to email marketing. So for some reason, the location of the inbox is a sort of sacred space. And I'll be honest, I don't fully understand why this is, but I do see that it is a sort of sacred space, and earning your way into people's inbox with content that they want to pay attention to is, again, helps build trust and is very powerful from a marketing perspective. So I'm going to stop talking for a minute. I want to hear from you panelists. Why do you use email marketing? Do you see it building trust? Do you see it as a marketing asset? Do you see the inbox as different than a Facebook feed or a Twitter feed? What are your thoughts?
Are you calling on us?
Yes to all of them, I suppose. My primary way of getting people onto my list is with a free course that teaches people how to use some software that I wrote. Mm-hmm. And I find that people will reply to those emails and say, they'll ask me questions. So how to use it, they'll ask me questions about other things related to my specialty. And I think that is a dynamic where people are willing to be vulnerable to me. Mm-hmm. I don't know everything, I need help. And because email is one-to-one, that sort of thing doesn't happen on social media, for example, on Twitter, or happening if someone reads a blog post mm-hmm. that I wrote. So on my email list, of course, if I write a new blog post, I send it to my list. But when people click reply, those exchanges are fundamentally different than the exchanges that I get on social media where sort of everyone is watching.
So are you saying people can be a little more vulnerable with you or more honest about what they really need help with?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
And that can happen too much. You can get too many questions sometimes. But there's no other internet-based. I'm thinking now if I know of another, I've written blog posts and I promoted blog posts on social media and I've been active on social media, but people asking me for help,
Mm-hmm.
There's no limit to the length of an email message, where of course with tweets, you have a length issue.
Right.
And people can be more honest about their problems because no one else is watching. That's been my experience of how I would contrast email marketing versus other sources.
So Hal, I'm curious, you recently sort of made the leap into using email marketing. What was the reason that you got it, that you decided to start doing that?
Well, I actually started about maybe a year and a half ago, and I bought a year-long subscription to Drip, and I didn't use it for about a year. And it wasn't until I think really I found a focus for my message, and the primary reason for me in using email marketing to reach large companies is that the sales funnel, the sales process takes a long time, anywhere from 6 months to 9 months.
Right.
So my primary objective is just to stay top of mind and make sure that I'm out there. They're reminded of me when they think of a new opportunity or when something comes up and they need a certain aspect of my skill set. So essentially, it's another way of just pinging them and making sure that I'm on their radar.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. I use it in much the same ways. I would say 3 ways for me. One is just to build relationships. I have an email course that is, I think, a 5-lesson email course, and it's not tied to a particular sales funnel. It's really just, I have, the first email is really finding out what's your challenge? What are you struggling with? And that's just all about building trust and relationships. Because I found that, as Ari said, people are more likely to share and be vulnerable. And I make a point to respond to every single email. So that sounds like a lot, but I found that building that trust goes a long way. And that's how I've built some loyal fans who always chime in and share with me. The other thing is I use email marketing for sales as part of my sales process. Kind of in 2 ways. One, I have sales funnels for some products, but also, which is something I didn't expect, is I get consulting leads from, I'm kind of a weirdo. I have complicated things and have 2 different sites, but I only do email marketing with one site. My consulting is separate, but I get leads. I get people asking about my consulting services from the emails that I send. So it builds that kind of people see you as an authority. Right. And then if they have a need, they'll reach out. So that was a surprise. And then I also use email for data. So I send out surveys from time to time, but also I keep note of the questions that I constantly get. And I use that to inform my product strategy. So those would be the 3 major ways that I use email.
So just to kind of add some context for people. So you have these 2 separate sites. One is focused on services. One is more of a sort of info product model, right?
Yeah.
You're selling courses on building courses, or just give a little more context for people.
Okay. Break it down. So my crazy world consists of 2 sites. I have Zen Courses, which is where I provide insight and kind of guidance on how to create online courses for solo entrepreneurs who are kind of doing the DIY thing and they want to create courses. So that's where I blog. That's where my email marketing is. That's where my email courses are, my products, all of that. That was born out of the other side, which is my consulting, where I work with businesses to create courses, help them create courses. So that's more of the instructional design, nerdy side of me actually helping to create courses for people. I see them as two different audiences, which is why I have two separate sites. Some people would disagree, but that's how things are set up in my world.
Right. So there's this relationship gets formed inside the inbox and then sometimes escalates to consulting requests.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, for me, what I found is that most of my lists, I would say they do fit that solo DIY entrepreneur who's wanting to make courses and just doesn't know where to start. And so Zen Courses is a great fit. But interestingly enough, I do get people who are business owners and they have small teams and they found me through Zen Courses and then they want to know if I do course consulting. So that's how that, that crossover happens from time to time.
Thank you. Jonathan, I know that you, maybe I shouldn't say, but you're considering writing a book about how trust affects the sales process. What's your take on, like, how does trust work with email marketing and the inbox and all that stuff?
Yeah, email, I mean, not to reiterate what you said, but email has a collection of traits that make it uniquely powerful in this regard. So, one is that it scales great. You can broadcast, to thousands of people, but at the same time, you can have these private back and forth conversations of unlimited length, from a practical standpoint. Like Janelle, I respond to every single email, even if it's just thanks, Joe. I respond to every single one, and that I think it feels important to me. I don't know. I don't know if it is important or not, but it feels important. And the other thing I do is that when I get questions from people, which happens regularly, you send out a broadcast to 1,000 people, you're gonna have questions coming back, and I never thought about it until we were all just talking about it, but I never share that story. Somebody might email me back with a success story based on something that they heard from me or learned from me. I never just turn around and share that with the list, even anonymous, even I don't anonymize it and then share it. Like, oh, an anonymous reader wrote in. I always ask for permission because email has that, it feels private, but you can broadcast. So before I switch modes, I want to make sure that the person who, sent me a private email, which is just presumed to be private, that it's okay with them for me to share it. And if I can share it, can I use their name as well? Because sometimes I think maybe they want me to use their name. So that's just to illustrate, I think, the sort of dual nature. It's an incredible medium. It's like the original social network, right? Like reply all.
Right.
Go. So I think it's just fabulous. There are other things that are really good, but podcasting I think is really good. Webinars are really good, but email has this unique combination of traits that make it just, it's stunning. And I'm a web guy, and I no longer think websites all that important. I think email is the only thing that matters.
Yeah, I mean, not to get too abstract, it's just amazing that it survived, that whatever that magic thing is has survived. Maybe because there's no one entity to ruin it, right, by trying to monetize it or whatever. But
right.
It's really interesting that it has survived since whenever it was originated. Okay, well let's move. Oh, Ari, go ahead.
There's just one last point I want to make. Your third point there is list as a marketing asset, and I think to me, that's been the most important thing. Last June is when I created my email course. And before that, I had no email list at all.
Okay.
And I mentioned that email course is how to use this software I wrote. I got so many questions and they repeated so much that 6 months later in December, I launched my first product, which was basically an attempt to answer all those questions. And it sold well. I sold it for $99 and it made maybe $4,000 or $5,000. And if I had not had 1,000, I think at that point, 1,000 people take my free course and give me questions, that product never would have been created.
Can you roll the sort of time clock back just a little more, because I want people to understand that you weren't like born with, fame, internet fame or whatever.
No.
How did you?
No, I wasn't.
Right, like
I was there. I can prove it.
I mean, you basically started with an open source project, right? That's kind of was the genesis of this.
Yeah. Oh, so how it really all began.
Yeah, I mean, not too much detail, just so that people can. I mean, basically, so people can identify with you that you're not you're not special, Ari. I mean, you are, but you have a lot of people could do what you have done, is what I want to say.
Yeah, that's absolutely. So to take just a step back, at my last full-time job, they gave all the engineers 1 week a quarter to work on their own project. And it was a real estate company. I was doing software engineering and data analysis, and I wanted to map things like house prices and sales, proprietary data like sales data and so on, sales leads per zip code, because we were selling advertising at the zip code level. And then I left, I was laid off from that company. So yes, I was not born internet famous, I got laid off. And I decided that I wanted to at least try spending more time on this project than I could at a full-time job. The full-time job was getting in the way of this. And the first thing I did was create a blog, so I had a central place to write updates as I was creating them. It got a lot of traction, and when I was looking for the next step, everyone said, you need to create an email list. Stop thinking, amateurs think about website visits, professionals think about list subscribers.
I like that.
And so, and I was doing some public speaking at the time around this to just raise awareness of this project. And I ran a workshop demonstrating how you could use my software to easily make maps of US Census data. And I published it on my website. I'm doing this thing, and everyone said, I don't live in San Francisco, how can I participate? And so I just literally put 2 and 2. Everyone says I need an email list. Email courses are one way to do that. And I just gave a free talk that everyone wants to attend. And so I did that, and I published it on my web, on my blog. And 2 really like bigwigs on Twitter retweeted it, and someone, a professor of data visualization who has written several books, tweeted it, and then I got hundreds of tweets, signups from him. And then someone who runs a blog about, a website about GISP, the art and science of making maps, wrote an article about it. And that got several hundred as well. And so in the first weekend, I think I got 600 signups. And so I knew something had happened very quickly, and I didn't know what it was or what to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm glad thanks for that context. I just wanted people to take away from that. It had a very sort of humble beginning, and we're not talking about stuff that you have to be special to do. Again, don't take that the wrong way, Ari. Anybody can do this stuff.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
I'm gonna keep us moving along here, because every one of these rabbit holes is endlessly fascinating to me. I'm gonna keep us moving along. So one of the next things I think you need to think about that does have implications on the kind of mindset angle is, what kind of response do you want to get out of your list? I mean, of course, you can think about your email list as like a public service where you get nothing back from it. But I'm couching this in the context of, this is the thing you do for your business, whether you're self-employed or you have a few employees. This is something you do to benefit your business. And so I think it really behooves you to think, what kind of response are you designing your email list to get? Here's the spectrum of what the options are. I mean, it could get a little more granular than this, but the spectrum basically goes from no response. You're just expecting people to passively consume whatever you send them via your email list, and that's the end of it. I think the next level of commitment would be that they might share it. They might pass along something to somebody else. The next level would be some sort of reply to an email, one or more emails, some sort of engagement, some sort of reaction. I get this all the time. People saying, this is great. This particular example really resonated with me. Or even more pointed things like, wow, Philip, I'm surprised to see you advocating this. This was, in this particular example, an email I wrote about how you could deal with a client who's reluctant to publish a case study. And someone wrote back and it was like, wow, I really was surprised to see you say this. So some sort of reaction or engagement or reply would be the next level of response. I think the next level beyond that would be some further commitment, someone moving from being on your email list, being passive, and deciding to attend a webinar for the first time, or move from a free subscriber to a paid subscriber, or move from a paid subscriber to a higher price level client, or committing to learning more, or committing to changing, or committing to spend more time or resources. Some kind of further commitment, I think, is the next level of response that you might design for. And ultimately, the furthest to the right is buying something. Maybe buying from the first time, or buying again, or buying something more expensive, or just buying into a new way of thinking. Those would all be, I think, the sort of highest level of response that you could try to create from your list. And like for me, the bar that I set is that I want people replying, engaging, reacting. That's the minimum that I want. I want anything I can get to the right of that personally. But I'm going to throw it right back to the panelists. Those of you that haven't left, what are you going for in your list? How I can see you're still, you got your video on. You had mentioned just being remembered. Is that pretty accurate, or are you going for something else in your email marketing?
Absolutely. And just being remembered is so important, because sometimes I'll find the best leads just emailing or calling someone up just to ask them out for lunch, and they'll say, oh, hey, it's funny that you called because we just had a meeting about resources and we need someone with your skill set. And it's really a matter of making sure that my articles and my, I would say, skill set is something they can depend on. Yeah. So when I'm publishing to them, I would say, here's the newest update on this technology stack. Here's why you should care about it, so that when they run into an issue that they can't solve themselves, or they don't have the capacity to solve themselves, I hopefully would be, someone they think about.
Right, and I think that's an interesting case of the sort of passive consumption. It's okay. It sounds like it's okay if people just passively consume, as long as that consumption leads to you kind of having a little place in their mind, a little cubby hole with your name on it, so that when they think of that need, they think of you.
Exactly, and I actually found this out accidentally with LinkedIn. A lot of times I'll follow up with people in person and say, hey, did you check out that really cool announcement that I published on LinkedIn? And they said, oh yeah, that's right, I saw your update. But I noticed a difference between I would say, interaction on LinkedIn versus the people who actually saw the article. Mm-hmm. So I noticed there's a higher percentage of people who saw my updates on LinkedIn than who actually replied. So I'm assuming the same must happen with email, where they're consuming the email but not actively replying and clicking, and that's still good for me.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. What about other folks? What kind of response are you designing your email to create, Jonathan?
Yeah, I really have just two. I'm a little bit newer to this, I think, than others, but I really have two. Well, three if you count passive consumption. Mm-hmm. So, opens, that's like, I'm going to assume that you're reading it. That's good. I want that. Mm-hmm. Certainly. Then the next level up for me, I don't even really think about sharing for some reason. The next level up for me is I'm always asking for questions. I want more more questions, because that helps me understand how to communicate what I know, but in a way that is going to click with people. So sometimes you need to change your language around, and it can be hard to, like, sometimes you're up against a brick wall. It's like, I keep explaining this thing, but people keep pushing back. So I want them to ask me questions so that I can understand, like, oh, I explained part of this it was a little too vague. I skipped over it because I know this part and I forgot that people who are new don't know this part, or there's an objection that I just never thought of before for some whatever reason. And I want to know about that. So I'm always asking for more questions, because that just turns into more knowledge. Like Ari was talking about earlier, you can find a new need. You can figure out how to better persuade people to act in a way that you think is going to make their lives better. It's the whole, I mean, that's the fundamental goal. And then so for me, it's really like opens, read the thing and then ask me questions. That's the next level up, and then buy. So it's really, for me, it's basically those three that I'm thinking about consciously.
Janelle, can I ask you, so you've got this range of like relatively inexpensive info producty type things all the way up to services. Where are you going? Like, what's the sweet spot for you in terms of how people would respond?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I'm kind of in the midst of this right now. When I first started my email list for Zen courses, I wasn't selling anything. I really just wanted to build trust. And so the response I was looking for was just, I asked a lot of questions at the end of my emails. I wanted to engage with people and build that relationship. And that was part differentiation and positioning to be different from, others in my niche who are not doing that.
Right.
Now I've released a couple of kind of just pretty simple, lower priced info products. And so I have sales funnels, email courses, which are funnels for those. And I have a couple emails where I ask for feedback, ask for questions. But for those, the response I'm really looking for is I want them to open it, I want them to read it. And then at the end, obviously, I want them to purchase. But then there's kind of the third tier for me now is I'm learning more. I didn't really know about sales funnels when I started doing any of this. So now I'm kind of integrating that with my email strategy, and it's shifted my desired responses a bit, because I'm at this point, I want the engagement and the interaction, but I'm also looking for, so it's kind of like three things similar to Jonathan. I want them to open the email and read it. I want them to click to my blog and take action and, either read the article and search and look at everything else that's available. And then for products, I want them to buy. So as I get into more higher priced products, I'm noticing that I have to focus on being very strategic with funnels and getting that ultimate response of them buying, which I think is a whole other can of worms that I certainly haven't mastered. So, yeah.
It's a journey.
It is.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be time cop and keep us moving here onto the next segment. Because this is where, it's all interesting, but this is where I think it starts to get even more interesting. So there are some common fears that are, if you're not using email marketing and you want to start, these are lurking around the corner. They're just waiting for you to turn around that corner and I think sabotage you. I think a lot of us are maybe at almost a subconscious level aware that this is, because it's so personal and you're combining that with scale, there's some weird stuff that can happen mentally and emotionally. So let's talk about those. The first is the idea that you're a spammer. That you're intruding on people's, sacred private inbox. And while I do think you should be respectful, if you're doing, opt-ins to your list appropriately and kind of handling those tactical things the right way, and I'm not really going to get into tactics here, you're not technically a spammer, but still there's this feeling of like, gosh, am I worthy of commanding somebody's attention in their inbox, or am I worthy of even inserting, even a non-commercial message into their inbox, even if they've opted in. And I think there's two things at play here. One is if you have an overly broad positioning, you're guaranteed to feel this way because you're unlikely to feel like you have something important to say. Even if you do actually have something important to say, you're unlikely to really feel it unless you've narrowed down your focus. And I don't want this to turn into a lecture about positioning, so I'm just going to leave it at that. The other is really just psychological, that it's kind of a self-worth thing. The idea that a stranger would listen to you talk about something or make an argument about something or teach them something or sell them something all gets back to self-worth. And I don't have a recipe for like fixing this. I just want to warn you that you're going to face it. Okay. The next thing that I see happen is what Ira Glass calls the taste gap. I won't read this entire quote to you, but there's this great interview with him you can find online. If you just search for Ira Glass taste gap, he's the host producer of This American Life. He talks about the fact that when you start something new, you're almost always worse at it than your aspirations or your sense of what is good work. And I believe this prevents a lot of people from actually ever starting something where they're putting something that they've created, even if it's purely commercial intent, even if your emails are just designed to do one thing, which is to sell some product or service, it's still creative work. And I think the gap between what you know is good and what you've seen other people do who are good at it and what you're capable of yourself often prevents people from even getting started. I think there's good news. Email marketing is a very forgiving medium. And if you work at it, I think you can learn very quickly and get past this. But just know that it's going to get you if you're not aware of it. And this is part of the reason why I take a very functional approach to content marketing. I focus on how can you solve problems for people through content marketing, and email marketing really is a subset of content marketing in my book. Or what questions does your clients have, or does your audience have? I come at it, content marketing, from that perspective rather than, well, you have to be good at writing or you have to be good at storytelling or whatever. Those things are ultimately helpful, but really your job here is to solve problems for your audience. And if you can make that your focus, I think you'll get past that taste gap a little more quickly. Some people honestly, genuinely are afraid of their list. So they actually have built a list and they're afraid of it. I copied this from a Facebook group that I'm a member of. I'm not going to call out the person. I'll read it to you for folks maybe who are listening to this just via audio after the fact. I have a question about starting to email more regularly, this person says. I used to email daily in 2008, but since then I've gotten lazy and only email about once a week to my main list, which is 40,000 people. I'm not sure why, but this list scares me. They hate it when I sell to them. And then I won't read the rest of it. There are people who are legitimately afraid of the email list that they themselves have built over time. So here's why I think this happens. When you start email marketing, you create a situation of asymmetric vulnerability. So if you're on my list, you see me do this all the time. I tell embarrassing stories about my past because A, it's funny, it's entertaining, and B, it actually is a demonstration of strength to be able to do that. But even if you don't do that, even if you just are teaching people, which I think is more like Janelle's approach, or even if you're just sort of informing people, which I think is more Hal's approach, right? In any of those cases, you create asymmetric vulnerability where you stand up, you stick your head up, and Jonathan's always pointing to this great quote, who is it, David Lee Roth, if you stick your head up, it's going to get cut down. Something like that.
If you stick your head above the crowd, someone's eventually going to throw a rock at it.
That's it.
Love that quote.
And it's the fear of being in that situation. First of all, the rock doesn't hurt that much when it's an email message. Okay. It does no actual damage. But the fear of that keeps a lot of people from starting. And I call it asymmetric vulnerability. You're the one who's sticking their head up, and all this crowd of people that you've assembled around you via your email list is right there, able to do that. Imposter syndrome is another big thing. The most effective email marketing makes some kind of stand, and it attempts to be at least mildly polarizing. In other words, you have a viewpoint, and you're repping that viewpoint through your email marketing. This leads to imposter syndrome. Who am I to say this? Who am I to make these claims? Who am I to say that value-based pricing is actually better? Who am I to say that you should take this approach to, designing your course? And so imposter syndrome is something you should watch out for. I think there's that same basic fear that we have around public speaking, which I learned. The actual extreme version of that is called glossophobia. It's that sort of fear of separating yourself from the herd, standing up on a stage and saying, listen to me. I've got something that you need to listen to. That same fear shows up, I think, in email marketing. Even though it's sort of private within the inbox, it becomes this private one-to-one thing. It still feels like public speaking. And because email marketing has this personal quality to it, which is a source of its power, it also feels like a rejection when somebody unsubscribes from your email list. You're like, oh, what did I do? Did I offend you? Did I say something wrong? Do you think I'm, full of crap? All these things come up. And again, the solution, honestly, is to just do it anyway and learn to thicken your skin in certain ways and just learn to deal with these things. It's worth it, in other words. But these are some things I think you should watch out for. You will get feedback from your list. The first thing I want to say before I give you any tips about this is, remember, this is your list, people. You built this thing. You own it. It is yours. Okay, so when you get feedback, realize that it's not that different. I mean, it's not that different than somebody coming up to you in a public space and sort of picking a fight with you. When the feedback is hostile, and you will get hostile feedback. You'll get hate mail, you'll get nasty grams, and that'll be, in my experience, maybe 2 to 5% of this ocean of awesome feedback that you get. So just to put this in context. So when you get that kind of negative feedback, I want you to ask the following questions. Is this someone who has bought something from me? If they haven't, have they actually implemented the free advice that they're maybe complaining about getting from me? And if both of those are not true, then you're probably talking to someone who's never going to ever buy anything from you. And maybe you want to take that into account when you decide how to respond to them. Sometimes they're giving you content that helps develop your ideas further. So sometimes it's sort of a gift in disguise, or sometimes they're giving you content that, depending on your tolerance for this, you can use to entertain your list later. And sometimes you just don't have to reply at all. It's up to you. So just some things to think about. Just know that this is going to happen at some point if you use email marketing assertively enough. And at some point, you may need to break up with a subscriber. What I'd encourage you to do is say, what's your threshold? What's the point at which you're just going to unsubscribe somebody from your list because of something they've done? And if you can kind of decide what's the threshold, that's sort of like the threshold for firing a client. Like, at what point do you say, you've crossed a line, we're done here? That makes it not such an emotional thing if you kind of have already thought this through. One of the things you can do when someone crosses that threshold is, if they reply to an email that came from the list, then they will have a personalized unsubscribe link at the bottom of their reply, unless they've trimmed that out, which is unlikely. And you can just click that and unsubscribe them right from within, your email editor. And let me tell you, this feels great if someone is just being outright hostile. You don't have to tell them, remember, this is your list, your rules. You don't have to explain yourself to anybody. And this is strange because if you start email marketing somewhat assertively, you will develop an emotional bond with your list. It's the weirdest thing. I feel loyalty to my list. I feel an obligation to, live up to a sort of implied standard with my list. And it's hard to switch that off in the individual case of the person who's a jerk. But just know that it'll happen if you do it long enough and assertively enough. So I'd love to hear from panelists on this. Have you ever had that sort of fear of your list? Did you ever have a taste gap? Jonathan, you go first.
Yeah, I've been taking notes actually as you've been going, so I'll try not to take too much time, but there's a bunch of really important stuff you brought up. So first, Yes, you're going to get feedback. Like I said before, I ask for feedback. I welcome it. I like it. Sometimes it hurts to read it because the person is just an abrupt writer. They're just brusque. And sometimes it's outright ridiculous, just bordering on troll-like behavior. Very rare. That's very rare. But it does happen, and it's painful. So I guess we're not going to get really into tactics, but if you know it's coming, then it's not too bad. It's not as bad. But the vast majority of times, it's not a troll. It's someone that either misunderstood, or they don't have the whole context, or they're just coming from a totally different place than you. Just try and view it as an opportunity. And if I don't think it's a troll, but I also am feeling too emotional to respond, I'll just reply and say, could you elaborate on that? I'm not 100% sure where you're coming from. And a lot of times they just dashed off a knee-jerk email, and then I'll get back like a letter that totally puts it in context. And again, this is very rare. I've probably only gotten 5 of these, but every once in a while it happens. It happens on Twitter a lot more frequently, where I'll say something, inflammatory on Twitter, and then somebody will be like, call me on it. And I'll be like, well, why do you feel that way? And then we'll have a thread, and I'll learn something. Well, you do have to have a little bit of a plan in place to do that, because you can get some gold out of that, because all of a sudden you found this whole new viewpoint that objects with your platform. Like you said, you've got some mission in life that you're trying to get across to this group, and now you've unearthed this new objection that now you can potentially either find out, oh wow, this is a whole new facet of this subject that I need to now figure out, or figure out how to address that with existing materials in a way that makes sense to that person or that type of person. So overall, though, getting pushback like that is usually a good thing if you can kind of take a breath, view it as an opportunity, and respond to it appropriately. Another thing that I think is super important, and this does not apply just to email marketing, it applies to any time you stick your head above the crowd. I do a lot of public speaking, so it happens there too. You need to believe that what you're doing helps people. And if you believe that, you owe it to them to interrupt them, to let them know that you have a cast for the broken leg. So like if you're in a restaurant and you're an EMT and someone's choking, you're not gonna be like, oh, I don't want to interrupt them. I don't want to interrupt their dinner and go give them the Heimlich maneuver. You're gonna go do it. And so if you believe that what you offer to people really, really is valuable to them and they really need to hear it, and you have some indication that they're choking, you have some reason to believe that they have the problem that you fix, then it's incumbent on you. You almost have a moral obligation to say, just want to tap you on the shoulder and let you know that this thing that I can see you're suffering with, there is a possible solution for that. And either I can offer that to you or maybe somebody else, but you need to know that there's a way to get that chicken out of your windpipe. So that, and then the one last thing, and then I'll shut up. You talked about imposter syndrome. I have nothing cures imposter syndrome better than getting that 95% positive feedback from your list. And you have it. I feel like imposter syndrome happens as you're about to write the email. And that's when you're scared. But once you put it into the world and you start to get feedback on it and you're doing good work and it's helping the audience that you've created, then it goes away. And you keep repeating that cycle and you have that panic feeling right before you press send every time. But then it's like you're sort of creating layers upon layers upon layers of like, wow, I do know what I'm talking about. And this is actually helping people. So it creates imposter syndrome, but it also solves it if you can just click that send button.
Yeah, that's right. That's why I write my emails first thing in the morning before I'm fully awake, to suppress the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I'm half kidding, but great points, Jonathan. Anybody else got perspective on that or experience?
Yeah, I can share a few things.
Thanks.
So I think for me, when I started out, I was very sensitive to unsubscribes.
Yeah.
And, for anyone out here who's watching and who's just starting, you're probably feeling like every time somebody unsubscribes from your list, it's like, it's a personal affront.
Yeah.
And what got me through that was really someone in my mastermind group who he just said, you have to look at it as you're just letting go of the people who aren't for you. You have to understand that that's a good thing because they probably were never going to engage with you, never going to buy from you, any of that. So, that really helped shift my perspective. And ever since then, I don't really worry about it so much. So that was one thing. I would say my fears, when I was jotting down, while Jonathan was talking. So one of the fears that I still deal with time and time again is, am I providing value? And it's not so much imposter syndrome. It's more of, I sit down and write because I try to remember that this is my list, but these are people. And so I want to make sure that I'm communicating and being personal and sharing and connecting with them as people while also providing value. And sometimes I struggle with, am I doing too much of one and not enough of the other? And I don't really know the answer for that, but I think that it helps when, for me at least, when I do hear back from my audience. I've always been very surprised when I do send out or write articles that are, more personal, but there's a lesson in there, and it's not always explicitly about courses, that people respond to that. So I think, for me, the takeaway to share is that just remember that you're talking to people. They're not just numbers on your list. But one of the challenges we talked about feedback. And so I haven't had any toxic list members, but I have just recently, last week, I got some feedback, and it essentially was it was a guy on my list who he emails me all the time. And he just said, I don't want to hear your stories. I just want you to tell me what I need to know, basically. And, I think months ago, I would have kind of just been so bummed out about that one email and obsessed. But I just realized that it's a personal preference because I've gotten emails from people who love the stories that I share and how I tie them in. So, I think it's important to remember that you're going to get feedback. And that's actually a good thing because it means people are reading, they're thinking about what you said, they're interacting with you. And, you just kind of have to develop a bit of a thick skin. And like Philip said, remember that it's your list. You get to decide how you communicate with them. So those are my big things.
That's awesome. Alan Weiss constantly says feedbacks are signs of objection, or objections are signs of interest. And I think that's useful to bear in mind. If someone took the time to write and say, well, I don't like what you said, at least they're paying attention, right?
Yeah.
Being ignored is a much worse fate. I think of the analogy of unsubscribes as sort of like distilling whatever you distill, gasoline or alcohol. It makes it more of what it should be. And I think unsubscribes from an email list work the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
I think we could talk more. I'm going to cut this short and do do another segment of stuff to think about. And so sorry, Ari and Hal, if you had something to say on that, we're just going to cut it short. Another mindset thing is, how are you going to engage with your list? And this, it gets a little more on the tactical side. And I don't want to get too deep into this, but if you're at that point of maybe committing more deeply to using email marketing or doubling down on it or what have you, I think you need to think through some of these issues. How frequently are you going to email your list? And I'm about to say, this is the crazy slide I was warning you about. Okay, it's totally paradoxical, but if your goal is list quality rather than quantity of subscribers, then emailing every day or every weekday is the best. I've struggled with this. I have not been willing to say this until today, to be honest with you. I started emailing my list every weekday starting in, I think, first or second week of January of this year is how long I've been doing it. I've missed a couple weekdays, and other than that, I've sent what I think is a reasonably high quality email. Not everyone is equally high quality to my list every weekday since mid-January of this year. And I really held back from recommending it, but I don't care who you're marketing to. I can't come up with a compelling reason to not do this. And here's why. It's like taking a champagne bottle and shaking it up and then pulling the cork off. And what comes out is ideas for content that are interesting and relevant to your audience. Now you can't really do this unless you have a narrow focus. Okay. So that goes without saying, I think. The other reason why is that almost no other human being on the planet is actually willing to do this. So you instantly differentiate yourself from any form of competition you have, and it's a massive boost to your perceived expertise because to your list members, it looks like, even if you don't really do this, it looks like you just sit around all day pontificating about this thing that is the solution to their problems. And you start seeing life through a sort of filter, and everything becomes email content. So, and it does that thing I talked about just a moment ago about it kind of distills your list down because you will get a higher rate of unsubscribes, but it gets you that, what I call a 200 proof list, which is like that most distilled real fans on your list. Now, your content does need to be tuned to work well with whatever frequency you're using. I think once a week is fine. I wouldn't email any less frequently than that in most cases. And so the range that I see is you got people like, and I don't mean to dismiss emailing less frequently, okay? I'm just saying I think it is ideal for most people to email very frequently. People like Patrick McKenzie, Patio 11, send these unbelievable, like 5, 6, 7,000 word articles to their email list like 3 times a year. I think, before Patrick got a job, he was maybe sent like 4 emails to his list over the previous year. And each one of them it was like getting a free book in your email list in terms of the quality. So that can work if that's your thing. And then Jonathan is my example of emailing every weekday, and his stuff is amazing also. So as long as you're providing value, I think you can make a range of things work. But what I find paradoxically is that it's easier to create content if you're emailing more frequently. And I want to give Jonathan the floor in a moment to talk about that because he's my backup. I wouldn't be willing to say this if I didn't have a little backup. You need to think about tone. I think most people feel like they need to be more quote unquote professional than they actually do need to be. Remember, as Janelle said, you're communicating with humans. And I think having a voice that matches the way you talk in real life, minus the ums and ahs, is a good idea. But it's something to think about. Maybe there's some situation with the people you're trying to reach where you do need to have a certain tone that's different than a sort of casual conversational tone. But I can say from experience that a casual conversational tone tends to work very well in email because of, I think it builds trust more than anything. I think you need to think about how you're going to measure performance of your email list. Remember this, I'm talking about this in the context of a business, and this is a tool that you use to make more money, or at least it's a intermediate tool that you use to ultimately make more money. I'll say this, I know this contradicts a little bit maybe what some other panelists have said. I think that every metric your email marketing software gives you out of the box is a vanity metric. So unsubscribes don't mean a lot to me. Open rate is suspect for various technical reasons we won't get into. There are some metrics that are pretty reliable, but I still think they're vanity metrics. I'm not really fully there yet, but I'm attempting to measure my email marketing performance based on sales, or sales that I can attribute to, my email list. But maybe you want to measure like how many replies do you get, or how many people respond to an offer that you put out via email. Those are all valid ways to measure that I think are actually better than caring about open rate or unsubscribe rate. Just something to think about. Again, I don't have time to get like way into the tactics here, but beware of those vanity metrics and beware of caring really at all about unsubscribes. Another thing you ought to think about is, are you going to use your email list as a sales tool, or is it going to be something else? I advocate at least considering using it as a sales tool because I think it's very powerful in that capacity. There's this idea I mean, Gary Vaynerchuk, I think, has sort of popularized it with a book called Jab, Jab, Right Hook. The idea is that you should give a lot of free content and then just occasionally insert a little, subtle sales message. And I just would encourage you to ask whether your local drugstore has a waiting period to buy ibuprofen. It does not. You can walk in, buy ibuprofen, and be back out on the street feeling better very soon. So do you really want to do the same where you have this sort of arbitrary sort of waiting period before you invite people to buy something from you? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Something to think about. I will say that the idea of selling in a really assertive way to your email list will definitely reveal your own beliefs about the value of what it is you offer. Straight back to what Jonathan said, if you don't believe in what you offer enough to stand up and, interrupt people in a gentle, polite way, then maybe you don't believe in what you sell. And I'm not trying to be accusatory. I'm just saying there's that element of sort of self-worth and believing in what you do. This is painful. And so if you get into email marketing and you're like, gosh, I'd really like to use email to boost my sales, maybe I'll put a sales message in this email, and then you kind of feel that sick feeling in your gut. That's a painful thing that I think can ultimately be productive for your business. So just know that if you decide to sell assertively through email, you'll face that. I'm going to link you at the end of this presentation to a training from Josh Earl. It's the best thing I've seen on this subject. So that's pretty much all I'm going to say on that. Panelists, what do you think? I'm just going to give Jonathan the floor. I've been waiting for this because Jonathan's experience with writing more frequently has been really interesting for me.
Yeah, so I'm going to echo what you said. It's completely counterintuitive that writing every day is easier than once a week or once a month, but it's true. And Philip walked me through the whole transition. I had all these lists and not lists, but I used Drip, had all these campaigns. They were weekly, or sometimes they'd be every 3 or 4 days. And I always wanted I hated writing an email and waiting for it to go out. And there's some things about it that bothered me. It was getting kind of confusing. And I was coming up to a book launch, and I was like, how am I going to do it? It's just, I don't need to go into the details. The point is, the thing that started to move me to daily was a bunch of complications with weekly. And I thought, wow, a lot of these things that I'm struggling with are because I'm not emailing every day, but I was petrified of making the commitment to do anything every day. I barely it's like maybe have coffee every day, what else? Not many things. And it was, in retrospect, like, what's the big deal if I miss a day? It's not like somebody's going to get hit by lightning, but still, you want to make the commitment, you want to stick by the commitment. And there have been plenty of times in the past when I've tried to be regular about blogging or regular about sending email in the past, and just completely drop the ball. And then you just feel like a jerk, like either lazy or I don't follow through. It just makes you feel bad about yourself. So this seemed like just another one of those things that was going to make me feel bad about myself. And then, okay, so then fast forward to making the transition and almost instantly loving it. Just instantly, once I jumped off the cliff and grew wings immediately. And the wings came from the list because it was like crowd surfing almost, like getting all that feedback and those questions. I couldn't answer questions fast enough. I have a whole folder, probably 100, 200 questions I could answer. I have content forever. And it just sort of, it's like this virtuous loop where you can't not write it. So now a couple of side benefits, all right? So I know I feel like I'm hogging the mic, but a couple of side benefits are, or another thing to point out is that I switched to broadcast instead of drip campaigns. I have some drip campaigns, they're very short, and they follow up with, you signed up for a webinar, you bought my book, you end up on a follow-up campaign just to make sure that you've been serviced and you don't have any questions. And then you get this email that, courtesy of Philip, that says, he kind of coached me through how to write it, this very long email of like, welcome to the inner circle. I'm going to email you every day. If you don't want that, I totally understand. Unsubscribe link right here. But if you do want it, welcome. And so it switches them to a broadcast. And what's cool about that, this is another fear that I want to bring up. What's cool about that is there's a bunch of email that came out on the broadcast list that they didn't get. And that used to bother me. I used to think, oh, but there's like all this great value that they didn't get. And now it's like, you know, they missed it, right? Like, how are they going to get the context of the list if they missed all that stuff? But guess what? Now all of that stuff is a new book. Because I've got 3 books that are 75% done just based on stuff that I've been writing to my list. And I've only been doing this for maybe 3 months. I don't remember exactly. But I have pages and pages and pages. I have like 300-page books in the can just from my list and assembling the emails that I sent out that I know these people who are newer to the list are going to want because they missed them. You know, so it's funny to have expiring content almost. And you know, maybe I'll give that away free to them. Maybe it'll be an upper to become a bonus for an upper tier of my main book. Maybe it'll become a new book. I don't know, but I've just got so much. I'm drowning in content. I was afraid I would not have enough to say to write an email every day, and the exact opposite times 10 is what ended up happening to me.
Yep, same here. It creates. I mean, it's the very definition of a virtuous cycle, and it's astonishing that could happen, but it does. Other panelists' thoughts on frequency, et cetera? Ari, how about you?
So I mentioned earlier that my list with my free course then led to the creation of a paid course. And so selling is my primary interest, I should say. I then got even more questions, and in April I launched my second course. And 3 months after that, I created a membership site because all of a sudden I had a couple of courses. I wanted to create more, and it just seemed easier to have a membership site where people pay to access the library, throw in a forum and live office hours. So everything now, and that simplified everything for me because now I can point everyone to one single thing to buy instead of not being sure what product is a good fit for people depending on where they're at. So I'm trying to sell everyone on my list onto this one thing. In terms of frequency and tone, in terms of frequency, so that's selling, that's your third point. In terms of measuring performance, I no longer think about open rates and click-throughs. I have very high metrics for both of those, and I've always had high metrics for those, but I haven't been selling very well. I mentioned I've only been self-employed for about a year and a half, so, and my background is technical, so I had never written any sales copy before.
Well, so why do you not think in terms of open rate and click-throughs anymore? Like what changed for you?
Because that's not going to pay my bills.
No, it's not. It doesn't print. Drip doesn't print out a voucher based on your open rate that you can use to pay your bills, does it?
Yeah, and Drip costs me like $49 a month. So if we all know what happens if they want money every month, then your list isn't and if their service isn't generating money for you, right? That ends. I think the main point I want to make though is frequency. I do something very differently than you and Jonathan do. Yep. In the last 30 days, I have sent at least hundreds and possibly thousands of emails, and yet I've also sent none. They've all been automated.
Right.
So, and I think that's not something you do because you do you have this very unique style of personal, funny emails every day. For me, I don't want to interact with my list, actually. I get too much email, and I want to work on my membership site. And I have a client I have a part-time job, which is great. I love it. And I have another lead for a large training. So I have difficulty multitasking, and I found that a lot of these replies were not good, were not very helpful for me, and I feel I'm already working too much. And so I have created Drip, which I use for my email service provider, has these things called campaigns and workflows. So a campaign is a series of, in my case, 6 emails in my course. I just rewrote it. It's very educational in the beginning, and then I try and upsell you to my membership site. If you don't buy my membership, then you're automatically put into a separate campaign. I use special software that gives you a $1 trial membership, and that link expires after the 3 or 4 day sale is up. That converts very well. So I at least have a paying member in my membership site, and I started that 3 weeks ago, and I've made sales every week attributable to that. And after that, I send you to a 2-month campaign once a week for 2 months that gives you my best blog content over my last year. From when I used to write a blog, I feel like I don't even write a blog anymore. And so if you join my mailing list, you get 2.5 months of my best content that I've created.
And I think you bring up an interesting point about how it doesn't have to be one way. It's all about how this can be leveraged to help your business. And I think you're absolutely right on that. You want it to be as automated as possible, and that can work too.
Yes,
it's a question of aligning it with what your business goals, what works with you. I'm going to play Time Cop again, and I have done a terrible job playing Time Cop, but this has just been so interesting. I want to touch on a few more things, and then see if there are any questions. I can't even see the question box. I don't know, but we'll see. Is your email list like a version of your blog? Is it something different? Do you treat it like blogging? I can't tell you what the answer is for you, dear listener, but I can tell you that email is different than a blog because of the interactivity. The fact that Ari, I think, or Jonathan, somebody pointed this out, that it's people are emailing you in sort of this cloak, this dome of privacy, this one-to-one communication, which makes it very different than a comment on a blog. So you may take that into account. In terms of what your content is like, I think there's several basic approaches. The approach I take, I've been heard described as infotainment. It's a combination of information and entertainment. And then there's just kind of straight teaching, which is more, I think, what Jonathan's doing, for example, more probably I think what Janelle and Ari are doing. And then there's more like content curation or providing contextualization or just informing people, which I think is a little bit more the approach Hal is taking. So any of those approaches can work and can produce results, as you can see from the panelists here. But in fact, you could even kind of blend all of those approaches. But it's worth thinking about which approach is going to be most natural for you, easiest for you to pull off, etc. I find that in email marketing, the fear, and Jonathan articulated this, I felt this myself when I started writing more frequently for my list. I was like, wow, I'm going to have to run out of content in about 2 months, and I'm just going to be out of things to say. But what happens is that you can explore the same themes over and over from a multitude of angles. It's sort of like a mini series, if you will. I think about it like this. What gets people on your list is your kind of basic market position. That's the sign over the front door to, Casa you, to your sort of world that people enter when they join your email list. But once they're there, you can explore other themes. I'll use Jonathan as an example. I think of his main theme as sort of like pricing software projects. Once people are in there, he's going to talk about proposals. He's going to talk about other things that aren't strictly related to pricing. I talk about things other than positioning once people are on my email list. So you don't have to know what those themes are right away. They may kind of emerge over time. But I think if you get beyond, let's say, 3 or 4 basic themes, your email list is going to start to feel unfocused and scattered. So you may want to put some thought into what those themes are at the outset. Jonathan talked about it. Other folks have talked about it. There's this feedback loop. Your list feeds you questions. You answer the questions, that generates new content. That loop doesn't start right away. So you may have to kind of tough it out. So be prepared maybe to do, a couple months of just thinking up what kind of content you're going to send your list until that feedback loop kicks in. If you have narrowed your focus and you're fairly specific in what you talk about, I promise it will eventually kick in, but it does take some time. And then the final tip I want to say is just trust yourself. You can do so many things with email marketing. It is a very flexible, forgiving medium. And every morning that I'm in the office, I sit down and I have a list of ideas, and I just pick an idea and I start writing an email, and I have no idea. I know where it's going to end up. It's going to end up with a pitch for one of my products or services, but I don't know what's going to happen in between. And I found that if you just trust yourself, the rest, that middle part takes care of itself. And I feel like that's a sort of larger theme, is that, yes, there's a lot of kind of scary stuff that email marketing brings up. It doesn't feel natural at first, but if you just trust yourself to start doing it, it will take care of itself. And I think it will be worth it, if you commit to it. So I guess that's me trying to sell you on the idea of doing it, but mostly this was just me and my gracious panel members trying to tell you what to expect and what it's going to be like, and some of the critical issues to think about. I think I saw one question pop up in the Q&A. I just want to point everybody to this URL. There's a course there that I just fully recommend, because it's I think a better way to approach doing email courses than anything else I've seen. It is a paid product. I don't get any money for promoting it. I'm just putting it in front of you because it's a super useful resource. There we go. There's that link. And this will be in the email message I'll send out later with the recording of this event. So what I'd like to do is stop sharing my screen, see if we have accumulated any questions. And Aisha, if you already have a list, do you start emailing every day, or do you make some kind of public service announcement to your list? I'd love to hear Jonathan's take on this. I just started. I was like, this is a new deal. This is the new boss. The old boss did not email very frequently at all, but the new boss is emailing every day. Now, when people join my list, they do get a kind of a heads up in that welcome email. So people can join my list by signing up for the positioning crash course. They get to the end of that crash course, they get a transitional sort of welcome email that says, hey, welcome to the inner circle. I'm going to email you every day. And literally what I say is either until I die or I get acquired in a hostile takeover by Procter & Gamble. It's exactly what I say there. So, and being a little funny about it, but that's my promise. And so I tell people what to expect, and that's how I do it. But when I made that transition to emailing daily, I just did it. I was like, well, in my mind, I thought fully half my list is going to unsubscribe. That did not happen. A few, unsubscribes went up, but I see it as a part of that distillation process. Jonathan, and you just kind of switched over, right? Is that exactly what you did also?
I didn't know how else to do it.
Yeah.
So I was running all campaigns because I was really kind of enamored with the idea of having all of these campaigns be automated, like Ari's describing. But I had several of them, and it was getting confusing because it wasn't like one after the other. Like somebody could be on 2 of them at once. I didn't really know where to send somebody after the first one, because which other one, it started to get really complicated. So what I did was I had one central campaign, and all of the other ones became feeder campaigns to go to the central campaign. And in the central campaign, that was the one that was getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, because it would have all these people signed up to it. And every it wasn't every day, but I was doing it weekly. I would always have to remember to make sure there was at least one email in the queue. I could never tell how far anybody was into the queue. And then, and there were, I had hundreds of people on this central campaign, but they were all getting a different email. So I'd be getting different questions back all the time.
Right.
So, and it'd be like, I couldn't even remember the email they're replying to because it was from 3 months ago. And it was like, what do I do? So I set up a workflow, and on your advice, I set up a workflow with basically the same sort of email that you said, largely copied actually. And it was kind of like, okay, look, you're getting transitioned into the inner circle, and it's going to be daily from now on. And you may or may not want that. So you just invite them to unsubscribe right then. It's like, I didn't want them to opt in. I wanted them to have to actually take an action to opt out.
Yeah.
Because, deliverability being what it is, a lot of people will just fall off the list by accident. So I didn't want that to happen. So I said, this is the way it's going to be. And if you want to unsubscribe, no hard feelings. These are the topics we're going to cover. This is why I think it's going to be of interest to you. It's a pretty long email. But I think that you set the expectations there, and then everybody's funneled off of that list. At a certain point, I basically killed the old list, and anybody who wasn't done with it, I just bumped them over to the intro email. Yeah. Because I was sick of maintaining the old list and even thinking about it. So, so I guess there was a warning,
Yeah, I mean, the side point that comes out of that is it's very easy. I found this in my own experience. It's very easy to bury yourself in complexity with a tool like Drip, which is super powerful. It's awesome. Not a criticism at all. It's just easy to go, well, that's cool. Let me do that. And then 6 months later, you kind of are like, what have I built? I built this monster. Any parting thoughts from that was our one question. Thanks, Aisha, for that. Any parting thoughts from the panelists or things you didn't get to say, you wanted to say? What do you got?
Yeah, I just want to say something from a newbie's perspective. And the reason why I didn't email for the first year, I was overwhelmed with all the different strategies and what to do. Even though I had committed to emailing once a week, I was enamored with the automation. So I started setting up 3 different sales funnels, planning out weekly emails for the next year 3 times. And at one point, I just became overwhelmed with the volume of work and making sure that the subscribers were falling into place and not getting emailed twice. So what I found out and what's working now is, regardless of the tool that you're using, if you're new to emailing, the important thing is to get comfortable with it. I find that writing is very hard for me. So even though it takes me a week to write, I think about it every day of the week. What's my headline? What's my hook? What's my CTA? And how it fills in. And by Friday, I'll have an email.
Yeah, that's a great point. That may be one of the most important points, is that if you overcomplicate it, thinking that that's what you have to do, you just have set up another barrier to even starting.
I have just one final thought. I've been doing email marketing for, like I said, a little over a year now, and it's still changing for me. Like, all of this focus to sales is very new, and the automated sales funnel that I've done, it's new, and probably in 3 months I'll be doing something different, and it's very different than what I was doing 6 months ago. But I think fundamentally, if you can get people to opt in to hear you talk about a particular niche topic, that's a very powerful thing for anyone who has a business. Because then eventually once you have that audience, they can tell you what their problems are, and then you can create some solution to them and sell it to them. And I just think that that's really powerful. And for anyone who's just starting out, I wouldn't get caught up with whether you need to email every day, whether you need to have even an email course to start this. But it's been very successful for me. So I highly recommend it.
And I would say solution is the right word, not product necessarily, not service, but solution. So don't think if you are not a product person that this doesn't apply. I think it very much does. James, I see your questions here. Sorry, I don't have time to get to them. I will find some other way to, I'll forward them to panelists or do my best to answer them maybe in an email to the list. Do want to keep this to 90 minutes. Really appreciate those who viewed and participated. I hope you got just a ton of value from this. Panelists, you guys brought it. You did deliver the value. Thank you. Really appreciate you all being here. I'm going to click end this meeting, which is really going to kind of unceremoniously hang up on everybody. So again, just thank you. See you all around.
Bye.
Thanks for having us.